All right, so in this video, we're going to be covering the Nebraska Cornhuskers. We're going to be reviewing the season that they had last year and their upcoming season this year in the fall. Last year was the final year that Scott Frost was their head coach. It just seemed like he can never get things right while he was the head coach of the Nebraska Cornhuskers. He had a good run at UCF before leading them to an undefeated season in 2017 with a Peach Bowl victory and giving them an undefeated season before he got hired to coach at Lincoln, Nebraska, where he was a alum at. And things just did not go his way. Things were, there were players missing tackles, players lining up wrong, bad discipline with the penalties, and just not good football that was being played for Nebraska, and they felt and the institution felt that there was a need for a change, and rightfully so. Um, and here comes their brand new coach, Matt Rhule. Matt Rhule was the former head coach of the Temple Owls before he went to go coach in Waco, Texas for the Baylor Bears. The Baylor Bears, before Matt Rhule got there, was dealing with the aftermath of the tumultuous Art Briles era. Now, it was more tumultuous off the field than on the field because on the field, Art Briles was producing one of the best teams in the Big 12 during his time there. But sadly, there was just a lot of players getting into trouble off the field, a lot of big scandals, especially scandals revolving around alleged sexual assaults of female students on the Baylor campus. So that encouraged Baylor to move on from Art Briles, which brought in Matt Rhule. The very first year, Matt Rhule did not go good. They went 1-11, but then the second year they went 7-6, and then the third year they went 11-3 and appeared in a Sugar Bowl in which they lost to Georgia. But the annual progression that they made under Matt Rhule was impressive enough that the NFL Carolina Panthers hired up Matt Rhule to coach their team for 3 years before they parted ways with him. And then a couple of months after he was terminated by the Panthers, he would later go on to get hired by the Nebraska Cornhuskers. And that's so it's going to be year one for Matt Rhule in Nebraska together as a unit. It's going to be year one for Nebraska under Matt Rhule. Last year, here's their schedule. Last year, first game of the year was against Northwestern in Dublin, Ireland, which is a big national broadcasted game because it was week 0. It was the main headline of the college football season because college football was coming back that week. Or excuse me, a week later. But anyways, they were playing in Ireland, and Northwestern beat Nebraska, credited to a terrible decision by Scott Frost to kick an onside kick when his team was up in the third quarter, and that short drive gave Northwestern a touchdown, and then they scored another touchdown to take the lead, and it was just the beginning, and it was starting to become the beginning of the end for Scott Frost and his time there. The very next week they came back and beat North Dakota, and then the very next week, which would be Scott Frost's last game as a Nebraska coach, they went up against Georgia Southern Eagles and get beat 45-42. The very next day, Scott Frost was fired, and Oklahoma. And then the very next week, they went up against Oklahoma, lost 49-14, took a bye week. Uh, they were granted a second bye week because of the fact that they played a week 0 game. So they took a bye week. Then they rattled off a couple of wins against Indiana and Rutgers. They then would lose to Purdue the very next week. Purdue, who went on to win the Big Ten West and perform in the Big Ten championship game, which for Purdue, that's a very, 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 very good year for them. Then they had another bye week, and then they went up against Illinois after they came back from their second bye week. Illinois improved last year. They were 5-7 in 2021, and then 8-5 the very next year under Brett Bielema, who was the former head coach of the Wisconsin Badgers and the Arkansas Razorbacks. Won the Big Ten twice at Wisconsin. Went over to Arkansas, couldn't duplicate the success, but has come back to Illinois and has now made Illinois a much more respectable program compared to where he was before. Then they lose again to Minnesota. Uh, then they get absolutely thumped by Michigan, who went on to win the Big Ten and make it to another college football playoff year under Jim Harbaugh. And then the very next week, 1 point loss to Wisconsin, who would fire their head coach Paul Chryst to hire Luke Fickell out of Cincinnati. Luke Fickell was able to build Cincinnati to the point where they actually became the first Group of Five school in the history of the college football playoff era to make the college football playoff. And he's now coaching the Wisconsin Badgers in Madison, Wisconsin. Uh, Wisconsin fans are expecting big things from Mr. Fickle, and I think rightfully so. I think he's a good coach, but I think it's going to take some time to build uh, build a Wisconsin team that's going to be expecting to compete for Big Ten championships in the future. And then their final game of the year was against Iowa, in which they won that, so they were able to end their season on a good note. Now, here is their 2023 schedule. There it is. Starting off week one at Minnesota. Minnesota has been a stable program because of the long tenured of PJ Fleck, who was getting offers from other big colleges in the Power Five to come coach their team, but he turned it down to stay at Minnesota. I think Nebraska can go on the road and beat Minnesota. The very next week they have Colorado. Now, if you saw my UCLA video, you'll notice I referenced Colorado hiring Deion Sanders. Deion Sanders, coming from Jackson State, going to be coaching at Colorado. Colorado, as we know, was 1-11 last year. They were actually tied with Northwestern for the worst record in the Power Five with a 1-11 record. And and like I said in the UCLA video, Colorado fans should not be expecting Deion Sanders to turn Colorado into a 7 or 8 win program right out the gate. It's going to take some time to build things up there in Boulder, Colorado. It's going to take some good recruiting classes, some good transfer portal classes, um, and not to mention Deion Sanders right now is dealing with some health issues, so his focus may not be entirely on Colorado right now. It's going to take, which might elongate the process even further. The very next week, they have North Illinois Huskies. I think that should be a victory for them. I think Nebraska can start off 3-0 because it's Minnesota, it's Colorado, who they're in the middle of a rebuild. It's Northern Illinois. They have a game after that against Louisiana Tech. I think that should be another victory. So a good start for the Cornhuskers. Then they get into the thick of their Big Ten competition. They get up Michigan. Michigan right now is the best program in the Big Ten. Back-to-back Big Ten titles, college football playoffs. They beat Ohio State the last couple of years. They finally got over that Ohio State hump. Jim Harbaugh seems to have righted the ship. Right now, they currently have the number 2 recruiting class in the nation per 24/7 Sports. Right now, you're loving life if you're a Michigan fan. The very next week, they're at Illinois. It's going to be on a Friday game. Um, I think uh, I think right now I say Illinois wins it because Brett Bielema right now is further along in coaching the Fighting Illini as opposed to Matt Rhule, who's just getting started at Nebraska. So I think Illinois wins that one. Then they have a bye week. If there's a game that Nebraska should circle in red, it should be Northwestern. Now, I know that sounds like loser talk, but losing to Northwestern is by far one of the worst losses for any Power 5 team last year. After Northwestern beat Nebraska last year, they lost the rest of their games. After they beat Nebraska, they went in 1-11 and went on an 11-game losing streak afterwards. But Nebraska was the only team to lose to them last year. So if I'm Matt Rhule, I'm using that as a way to remind my players how embarrassed you guys were last year. The fact that you were the only team that was bad enough to lose to Northwestern. And I would try to fire these guys up and make them want to go out there and just absolutely dominate and blow out Northwestern. And if you're a Nebraska fan, I think that's what you should be demanding. You should be demanding that Nebraska come back with vengeance on their mind in this game. And then the very next week, they got Purdue. Purdue just lost their head coach, Jeff Boredom, who went to go coach the Louisville Cardinal in the ACC. I think Purdue is going to fall off from what they had last year at 8-4. They don't have the same coach, and they probably are not going to get as bad of a division as the Big Ten West was last year. So I'm gonna say Nebraska wins that one as well to put Nebraska at 6-2. Which, hey, for them that's an improving year. They're gonna then Nebraska's gonna be on the road at Michigan State. Michigan State has been has deteriorated. I think it's gonna has deteriorated last year. Mel Tucker, former Colorado coach, got hired by Michigan State. Had a good year 2021, mainly led by their what should have been a Heisman finalist, or actually a Heisman Trophy winner, in my opinion, and their running back Kenneth Walker. I thought he absolutely carried Michigan State last year. They should go on the road and beat Michigan State. They don't have Kenneth. They're far from having Kenneth Walker. Michigan State's secondary has been one of the worst secondaries in the nation for a couple of years right now, and I don't see reason to think it'll change. They don't even have their starting quarterback from last year, Peyton Thorne. He transferred to Auburn. Um, I think Nebraska should go on the road and beat them. Maryland, I'm gonna say they go on. I go on. They can. Oh, I'm sorry. This is a home game. They're playing Maryland at home. I think they could beat Maryland at home. Uh, right now, it looks like a pretty good year for Nebraska. And then they're only on the road at Wisconsin. I don't see them winning on the road at Wisconsin. Wisconsin is a very Madison, Wisconsin. The Camp Randall Stadium is a very tough place to play. I think Luke Fickell at this point will have his Wisconsin Badgers playing real good football towards the end of the year. I think they lose to Wisconsin. Iowa, I think Iowa can go on the road and beat Nebraska. You know, Iowa's a very tough matchup because they play real good defense. But the problem is with Iowa is that they have been left behind by modern college football. They've had the same head coach for over 20 years in Kirk Ferentz. Um, they're a old school offense, which is uh, line up a couple of tight ends, line up a couple of tight ends, and run the football down your opponent's throat. But sadly, in today's college football, you can't expect to go far with that kind of offense. You need a dynamic passing attack in college football today, and Iowa has been stubborn and persistent in not making the necessary evolution and changes to their offensive philosophy. And I don't think they'll do that unless Kirk Ferentz is no longer the head coach there. But I do think Iowa can go on the road and beat Nebraska. So I have an 8-4 record right now for Nebraska. I have them losing to Michigan, losing to Illinois, losing to Wisconsin, and losing to Iowa. I think Matt Rhule is going to make a big difference for the Nebraska Cornhuskers, and I think they're going to have a very good year. I think 8-4 should be the goal if you're a Nebraska player, and I think that should be the expectation if you're a Nebraska fan. I like Matt Rhule. I think having him in will be a breath of fresh air to the program, and he has shown, whether it was at Temple or at Baylor, at least in terms of college football, that you keep him around, your program is going to get better, and I have no reason to uh, doubt that.